It's a pattern that you see replicated over and over and over again. You know you know exactly what spiritual wickedness in high places is. It's when you hear a talking point that begins at the top of the food chain, and the next thing you know, everybody's saying the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? It's when a decision is made that impacts hundreds of millions of people, and all that trickles down is the pain and suffering, none of the wealth, none of the blessings, only the plague. You want another example of spiritual wickedness in high places? It is the requirement that this nation has, so many people have, to reject fundamental facts and truth and reality and objective reality. The need and the requirement to live in an alternate universe where up is down and down is up. If we're not careful, we will find ourselves taking the lead of powerful people over us, trickling down their spiritual wickedness. Let me bring this a little bit closer so that you know exactly what I'm talking about. When decisions are made that exacerbate what is already happening in our lives. I told you, and I think this was in Bible study. We had Bible study before tonight, before tonight's revival service. We've got to talk about this through the lens of the American plague that's currently happening. And it is a confluence. There is an intersection of calamities. There is a multitude of things that are happening right now, all at the same time. And for many reasons, we either don't see it or we can't bear to look at the truth of it. I want to play for you a clip, and I want you to listen to this Dr. Sanjay Gupta, as he outlines the new CDC policies as it pertains to COVID-19. And I want you to listen very carefully to the angst in his voice, because hear me when I tell you, what we are experiencing and getting ready to experience in this country is the result of Pharaoh, that power structure. Not literal Pharaoh. The power structure that refuses to let the people go. You get these kind of results. Run the video for me.
Themselves from the virus.
Well, these are some of the biggest changes in guidance that we've heard from the CDC in quite some time now. And there's people who say, look, this is a long time coming. Other people who understandably are very concerned about this, especially people who are more vulnerable, have some sort of pre-existing condition, for example. Let's take a look here. Previous guidance on the left, current now guidance on the right. The top line is the most significant. In the past, they said days 0 to 5, you should stay in isolation. Now they're saying stay home or away from others if you have symptoms. The reason that's concerning for a lot of people is because we know you can still be contagious even if you don't have symptoms. Day 6 and onward, they say, especially if you're going to be around vulnerable people, you should wear a mask. You should think about ventilation. You should try and keep your distance. Now, part of the reason they're making these changes, the CDC, a few reasons. They say that 97% of the country now has some degree of immunity, which is probably true between vaccination and people who've been previously infected. But keep in mind, a lot of people get infected over and over again. So if they have the immunity, it doesn't seem to last very long. Also, if you look at hospitalizations and deaths, they've gone down considerably, 60% lower for hospitalizations. Deaths have gone down 83%. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that some people say this is sort of fluifying COVID. We're treating this like flu. But I want to show you this graph that we pulled that makes this case that COVID is still a lot more concerning than flu. Orange line is COVID. Go back to 2019, 2020, you see the difference between COVID, flu in blue, and then red is RSV. Even now, most currently, you see how much more of an impact COVID has overall on hospitalizations. In the last season, flu had about 21,000 people who died, With COVID, it was closer to 245,000. COVID is not flu. People can still spread this even when they're asymptomatic, as I mentioned. They are more contagious. They are contagious for longer with COVID. They can experience symptoms for a long time after infection, long COVID, and it can cause some very serious illness in people. So I think that's the concern, that even though it's being treated more and more, COVID's been treated more and more like flu, it is not flu. As we get more information about these guidelines, we'll certainly bring them to you.
All right. I needed to share that clip. And while many people may wonder, well, Dixon, how is this connected to revival? How is this connected to the word of God? How is this connected to anything? And I hope, well, no, I know for certain my regular listeners have already drawn the connection. Whether they be Christian or not, they already see the connection. We are in year 5 of a pandemic that now the powerful, the powers that be, the rulers over us, those who make decisions that impact hundreds of millions of people, have decided to tell you to treat something that's not the flu, to treat it like the flu, to take only one day. When I don't know if you remember at the beginning of all this, of the pandemic, they told you to take 2 weeks. And even that was not enough. It's really 21 days that you should stay out when you have had COVID. But because 21 days of sickness was too high, was too long for your bosses, for your jobs, for those clubs that you used to spend your money in, for all the places where you used to go and spend money. See, the reason I'm connecting this to Pharaoh, it beyond just the idea of the 10 plagues and the fact that the United States of America has multiple plagues layered on top of the other right now. It's not only that comparison, it's also the fact that Pharaoh could not let go of the children of Israel because he needed them for labor. Pharaoh needed the children of Israel to be able to produce the gross domestic product of Egypt. And so, of course, Pharaoh was not going to pay attention at the first plague. He was like, what is this? You're turning the Nile into blood. I have wizards, I have sorcerers, I have magicians who could do the same thing. And so he hardened his heart. Because why? Because he just wanted to ignore God? No, because he had to hold on to that labor so that he could hit that next quarterly profit margin, so that he could pay all the people who needed to be paid in his court. See, if you look at it through that lens, then you would understand that it's not just the CDC that's hardened its heart and said that you should go head on back. You've got COVID and they say, go back to work one day. You might as well not even go. Why wait? If you're going to go back to work with COVID after one day, why even take that one day off? Just go straight with, just you might as well go with COVID fresh. You just caught it. You might as well go right back, because it literally makes no sense except for the fact that they have to still get your labor just like Pharaoh did. And so what does this country do? It hardens its heart and ignores all of the signs, ignores all of the calamities, ignores all of the plagues that are mounting up right now simultaneously. See, there's a reason I'm going with Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. See, this thing is so twisted. It's so twisted, in fact, that it is more difficult to ask someone to wear a mask than it is for them to just come on and cough and bring their virus right back to you. In other words, it has become so taboo to do something as common and as simple as putting on a mask. Why? because we're dealing with principalities and rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, organized campaigns to make wearing masks taboo. And whereas the Spanish flu of 1918 was over by 1921, here we are with all of our sophisticated technology, and we're 5 years in. Why? Because Pharaoh has hardened his heart. And because Pharaoh cannot let your labor go, Pharaoh cannot let your consumption go. Pharaoh needs you to go back to the bar. Pharaoh had to make sure that you didn't get to go home and rest and pause and reflect and have a moment to unplug from the day-to-day life of driving in rush hour traffic from one pyramid to the next. Pharaoh could not let you get rest, because if you got rest, then maybe you would have time to actually think about how Pharaoh is wielding that power over you. What am I saying? The reason we are in year 5 of this pandemic, and the reason people are catching COVID 5, 6 times, is because this system could not let you go. It could not let go of your labor. It couldn't certainly not let go of your consumption. Because if you went home and you stayed home and quarantined long enough, well, then maybe they would not have made $1 billion that quarter. And now where are we? We are literally at the place where folks don't even tell each other. Nobody's talking. You can't wear a mask. Why? They ask you why you're wearing a mask. Is that not a sign of a system that has hardened its heart and ignored and I'm just talking about COVID. Are we missing the total calamities of our day? I mean, not to come off as alarmist. Again, this is by far the most direct language that I am using. I have never used my platform to alarm anybody, but I believe that one of the reasons they are so terrified of you becoming woke is that you might actually see exactly how they are destroying us. One calamity at a time, one disaster at a time, one war at a time, one pandemic at a time, climate change. They ignore it, forget about it, destroying us, all because they can't let our labor go. They can't let our consumption go. They got to make sure that you punch that clock, whether you're punching the clock in an office building or punching a clock at a bar. It is your participation in this system, in Pharaoh's system, that is the reason Pharaoh got you there in the first place. And here we are in the middle of plague. We're past plague number 1, plague number 2, the plague of frogs. We're past that. Pharaoh ignored that. The plague of lice, Pharaoh ignored that. The plague of flies. I want you to see how every time Pharaoh ignored the command to let God's people go, the calamities compounded. The disasters got even more complex. And death reigned even greater. Had Pharaoh, just to make sure everybody's with me, Pharaoh represents anything and everything that has power over you to command you to go and do. Pharaoh's not just the biblical narrative. Pharaoh represents the system that refuses to let you go and go home and be safe with your family because they need you to spend money. That's Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a system that requires you to come into an office building, even though you could do your work from home because, well, they have to have an excuse to pay that mortgage every single month to keep that office building making money. That's Pharaoh. The inability to let you go for a moment, because if Pharaoh let the children of Israel go like God told Moses to tell him to, Pharaoh might have missed his quarterly profit margins. And so Pharaoh hardened his heart. He ignored the river turning into blood. He ignored the frogs. He ignored the lice. He ignored the flies. It got so bad, even Pharaoh's magicians were like, wait a minute, Pharaoh, this looks like the hand of God. Pharaoh ignored it. Ignored the death of the livestock. He ignored the plague of boils. He ignored the plague of hail. It went from something small to something big, to something bigger, to something worse, all because Pharaoh refused to let the people go according to the word of God. And here we are in 2024 dealing with a calamity after another, one disaster after another, one apocalypse after the other. And they require us to ignore it. They require us to go along with it. Listen, the first time I got COVID, I got it at church. First time I got COVID, I got it at church. Let me change my language. But the only time I got COVID, I got it at church. And I say that to say this, folks, if this country has abandoned us, then we better take care of ourselves. If this country has abandoned us, then we better take care of ourselves. And the price of us getting together and praising the Lord cannot be us spreading COVID every Sunday, a super spreader event. And then you can't even take a week off anymore. You got to go to work the next day. Folks, if you cannot see what is happening in front of our eyes, then perhaps you're part of that Pharaoh system and your heart has been hardened. Ask yourself, why is it so difficult to get us to just do the right thing? Why is it so difficult for us to just stand on the side of objective reality, measurable and verifiable facts, scientific consensus that explains exactly why it is so hot at the beginning of March when it should still be a little bit cool? Like we understand what is going on. The word has come to every single situation. We know what's causing climate change, but we harden our hearts. We know what is exacerbating the spread of COVID-19, but we harden our hearts. We know America knows exactly the true nature of the threat of white supremacy, but it hardened its heart. Why? Because the truth is inconvenient for Pharaoh. And because what we're dealing with is more than just one person. What we're dealing with is much more than just the bad policy decisions of any one administration. In fact, if you look at it, what we're dealing with is a consistent narrative, a consistent decline, a consistent path to exactly where we are, how we are in this nation. We're not here by mistake. We're not here where after 50 years of experimenting with neoliberal economic policies, what is that? Experimenting with unfettered capitalism, experimenting with the financial dreams of Ronald Reagan. We are more impoverished today because the wealth never trickled down. The rich got richer, yes, but the poor got poorer. And that was the point. The point was to get us exactly where we are. The point is that there are people who are preparing to make a killing off of a nation that is sick with long COVID. That's spiritual wickedness in high places. You want to know what the Antichrist is. You want to know what spiritual wickedness is in high places. It's when a company can get the entire nation to have to conform to what they want because they don't want to let their employees take sick days off. I'm talking very specifically about Delta Airlines, one of the first companies that caused us to roll back from 10 days of sick days now to 5 days. And now 5 days was too much. And now we have to go down to 1 day. Why? Because Pharaoh doesn't want to let your labor or your consumption go because they got to make that money. And the love of money is the root of all evil. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. We wrestle against people who have the unmitigated gall to believe that they have the authority to make detrimental decisions over all of us and just leave us out here to fend for ourselves because they got to make their money. They got to secure their bag. Folks, I want to bring your attention to the fact that the things that we are facing, number one, if you don't recognize you're facing it, then I don't really know what to tell you. See, there's a lot of danger, a lot of extreme danger in normalcy. People believe that it's normal to get COVID 5 or 6 times because it's become normalized. People feel like it's normal to see Nazis marching down our streets on any given weekend. That's because it's become normalized. People believe the treatment of human beings at our border like they're animals is okay because it's become normalized. People believe that the weather changes that are happening, oh, it's just a beautiful day in winter. Go outside and cut your grass and enjoy the sunny weather in February because it's become normalized. But when you pause and consider that there are people who have enough economic power and political power to take something as completely upside down as going back to work after being sick with COVID only one day later, because the entire system demands that you push them right back out. Oh, it's fine. It's just a fever. Ensuring, guaranteeing that everyone on this planet is going to get COVID over and over and over and over again. And you want to know what real spiritual wickedness is in high places? Watch investments in long-term care facilities, home care facilities, because a nation that is sick with long COVID can generate money for people who give long COVID care. That's what's happening right before our eyes. But those decisions don't come by one person. Like there's no one Pharaoh in this story, right? Somebody else would take this sermon and try to say, oh, he's talking about the Biden administration. No. Then somebody else would take this and say, oh, he's talking about the Trump administration. No, I'm talking about all of them. I'm talking about this whole thing that looks at us and says, instead of doing right by us, it's more important that they don't let our labor go, that they don't let our consumption go. They harden their hearts, and now they had left us. And so it's incumbent upon us. What do we do? What do we do about it? One, we got to realize it. You got to understand, forgive me for taking so much time hammering home the point of what's really going on here. But if you don't open up your eyes and realize you better mask, even if everybody else isn't masking, if you don't realize that you better get the vaccine, even though people are still trying to tell you it's got the mark of the beast, right? Coordinated campaigns, people who are so invested in making sure that this thing goes on and on and on in perpetuity. Because there are people who make money off of it. That is spiritual wickedness in high places.